Rain had already soaked through Helena Kowalski's slippers when Lady Renshaw's carriage turned into Hanover Square, and she walked beside the left wheel with one hand on the slick panel so she would not fall under it in the dark. Water crept in at every seam of the thin kid leather. Each step pressed cold into her bones. Her stockings clung to her calves like wet paper. She kept her chin level because the street was full of eyes. Coachmen under dripping hats, boys carrying parcels, ladies ducking beneath black umbrellas, 2 gentlemen in capes who glanced at her once and then again, slower as though trying to decide why a young woman in servant black was pacing an aristocrat's carriage on foot. Her fingers were bare. Lady Renshaw had taken the gloves that morning because they were, in her words, still too decent for housework, and the lye from the laundry had split the skin at Helena's knuckles into narrow red lines that stung each time rain touched them. Hunger had settled low and hard beneath her ribs. She had eaten only the heel of bread left on a silver tray after Clara and Eliza finished their luncheon and laughed over bonnet ribbons that cost more than Helena's monthly allowance had once been. The ache in her stomach came in waves now, sharp, then dull, then sharp again, and with each spasm she remembered the roast pheasant she had basted, the lemon cakes she had iced, the sugared almonds she had packed for the ball, while the cook stood over her and said, not unkindly, that girls like Helena learned not to taste what they prepared. The day had begun, before dawn, with fire ash and needle thread, and had never lifted its hand from her throat. She had polished Clara's shoes until she could see her own hollow face in the leather. She had pressed Eliza's gowns, mended a torn lace sleeve, then carried hot irons upstairs until her wrists trembled. She had stitched pearls back onto bodices she would never wear, and fastened a diamond clasp at Clara's nape with hands that smelled of soap and starch. No one thanked her. No one looked at her except to correct her posture or speed. Lady Renshaw moved through the dressing room in rosewater and rustling silk, issuing verdicts as if reading weather. Too slow, too plain, too clumsy, too visible. The house had once held Helena's father's books in every parlour, and his violin above the drawing-room mantel. Now the shelves bore porcelain spaniels and French novels Clara had not opened, and the violin case sat locked in an upstairs cupboard where dust settled thick as felt. After his funeral, Lady Renshaw had said that economies were required. Economies had meant Helena's tutor dismissed, then her music lessons ended, then her allowance listed in the household ledger under debt, owed for her own keep. Economies had meant the attic room with no carpet and one cracked basin. Economies had meant that the daughter of the house learned to stand when others sat. The name on the London lease remained Kowalski in ink, but in practice it belonged to Lady Renshaw's voice. At Bond Street the carriage halted before the Renshaw townhouse to collect the last parcels for the Armitage Assembly Ball, and the footman jumped down to unload hat boxes while rain drummed on the pavement and ran from the horses' flanks in dark streams. Helena stood near the rear step, breathing through her mouth to steady the nausea, when Parker, the senior footman, lifted a long garment box sealed in ivory ribbon and announced to the second man, loudly enough for the nearest shop front to hear, "Miss Clara's triumph for tonight." Helena knew the weight of that box. She had stitched the final seam herself by candlelight 3 nights earlier. Ivory satin overlaid with seed pearls, a narrow waist, a fall of fabric meant to move like water when she turned. It had been her gown. Her father had ordered the silk before he took ill, insisting she should attend one ball as his daughter before London forgot his name. She had kept the bodice wrapped in muslin for 2 years, touching it only when the house was asleep. Lady Renshaw had demanded it that afternoon with a small smile and an outstretched hand. "Miss Clara will wear it better. she had said, as if discussing gloves, as if Helena's face were not in the room. Now, in the rain, Parker gave a short laugh. "A pity plain girls cannot keep fine things." The second footman smirked and said nothing. Helena kept her eyes on the carriage wheel and swallowed until the sour taste eased. Across the street, a milliner's apprentice, barely older than the Renshaw's youngest page, paused with a bandbox in her arms and looked at Helena with quick, startled pity. Helena looked away first. Pity from strangers burned more than mockery from servants who had chosen their side. By the time they reached the service passage behind the townhouse ballroom, her shoulders shook from cold she could not hide. Wet wool, lamp oil and hot tallow thickened the air. The corridor walls sweated damp. Somewhere beyond the door, violins tuned in restless fragments, bright and careless, while inside the dressing chamber Clara stood on a footstool with her arms raised, and Lady Renshaw tightened Helena's ivory bodice one eyelet at a time. Eliza sat before a mirror as a maid arranged her curls and whispered cruel amusement into the glass. If Helena had worn it, people might have mistaken her for a governess pretending. Clara's laugh came thin and pleased. "Do not be absurd. Governesses are better fed." Helena stayed near the threshold with a basket of discarded ribbons against her hip. Her palms were raw where the wicker rubbed. Lady Renshaw did not look at her when she spoke. "Do not drip on the carpet. Hold still. Hand me the pearl pins." Helena crossed the room, placed the pins in her stepmother's waiting hand, and stepped back before Clara's elbow could strike her again. The bruise from yesterday's blow, hidden beneath her sleeve, throbbed in rhythm with the music in the next room. On the dressing table lay the engraved invitation card addressed to Miss Helena Kowalski in a careful clerk's hand. For one moment she stared at it and remembered her father pronouncing her name with fierce pride, as if each syllable were a standard lifted in battle. Then Lady Renshaw covered the card with her fan and turned her head. "You will fetch black thread. Miss Clara's hem must not drag." No one in the room spoke Helena's name. When the last pin was set, Clara turned before the mirror and smiled at her own reflection with Helena's pearls at her throat. "How fortunate," she said, brushing an imagined crease from the satin, "that we share a household, if not a figure." Eliza laughed until she coughed. Lady Renshaw took a small crystal vial from her reticule and touched rosewater to Clara's wrists, then to Eliza's, then replaced the stopper and closed the clasp without offering it to Helena. The omission was deliberate. So were all the others. Helena stood beside the wardrobe and watched the women leave in a sweep of silk and candlelight, heard the murmur of greetings from the passage, the rustle of cloaks, the distant cry for the carriage to be brought round. The room fell still in their wake. On the chair by the hearth lay what remained for her, a plain black morning frock, cuffs mended 3 times, waist taken in and let out and taken in again, hem gone thin where it brushed stair treads and ash buckets. She touched the fabric. It felt dry, almost warm compared with the soaked wool on her skin. Her reflection in the mirror showed a narrow face, dark hair pinned too tightly, eyes made larger by fatigue and hunger, and the refusal to cry where anyone could see. Plain, they called her, and perhaps they were not entirely wrong in the arithmetic of beauty that governed rooms like these. Yet the mouth in the glass was resolute. The spine remained straight. She removed her wet day dress, dried her arms with a linen cloth, and pulled on the black frock with careful, practised movements, fastening each hook as if preparing for judgment. Outside, wheels ground over gravel, and laughter rose, then faded. Helena tied the final ribbon at her wrist, lifted her chin to the empty room, and prepared to go anyway. She opened the dressing-room door before her courage cooled, gathered the skirt of the black frock clear of the wet threshold, and stepped into the service passage where the last vibration of carriage wheels still trembled through the stone. Candle smoke hung low beneath the ceiling. A draught moved along the corridor and found every place the wool did not cover. Her shoulders tightened once, then stilled. At the bend of the hall she passed the narrow pier glass used by maids to check caps and aprons. It gave her back a stranger made of angles and rain-dark hair, a woman who looked less like a daughter than a household correction set walking. The sight did not wound her because the wound was old. It had started the winter her father married again, when Lady Renshaw first crossed the threshold in dove-grey silk and called Helena dear child, while measuring the width of rooms with her eyes. It had deepened after the wedding breakfast, when the new bride asked where Helena's mother's portrait had been hung, and received the answer from Helena herself, in the morning room, over the escritoire. By evening it was gone. No servant admitted moving it. No wall in the house showed the nail mark. Helena had learned the method quickly. Nothing was taken all at once. A portrait vanished, a bookcase emptied by inches, a music folio mislaid, a necklace clasp repaired and not returned. Her father had noticed each loss too late, always after supper, when his cough worsened and he sat with one hand pressed against his ribs as though steadying an unseen blow. "We must keep peace," he had said in Polish once, quietly, when Lady Renshaw had sent Helena from table for speaking over Clara. "Until spring!" Spring had come, and then another winter, and peace had meant surrender under cleaner names. Clara had inherited Helena's French governess, with the explanation that one girl could not be expected to share instruction indefinitely. Eliza had taken the blue pelisse her father bought Helena at 16, because its sleeves were wasted in the attic. Even the small things had gone to them in procession: a tortoiseshell comb, a pair of garnet drops, a stitched reticule Helena's mother had sewn in Warsaw before England swallowed her. Lady Renshaw called it redistribution within the family. Clara called it justice for superior taste. Eliza called it habit and laughed. Helena called none of it anything. She went down one stair, then the next, hearing the ballroom carriages roll away into rain while the words of past years moved beside her as plainly as footsteps. At the top of the attic flight she paused, not from hesitation but from breath. The day's labour had hollowed her chest. Lie had roughened her throat. She climbed anyway, hands sliding along the splintered rail polished smooth only where her palm had worn it down. Her room waited under the eaves with its single candle stump, the cracked basin, the bed narrow as a cot, the trunk at the foot with a lock long broken, because no one believed she possessed anything worth stealing. They were wrong in one respect. She possessed what she remembered. On the shelf above the washstand sat 3 books she had hidden from sale by wrapping them in old sacking and marking the bundle "Mop Heads" when Lady Renshaw ordered the auction after her father's death. One was Mickiewicz in thin calf binding. One was a volume of Milton with her father's margin notes in a hand that pressed too hard on downstrokes, and one was a worn account ledger from his shipping office, useless to everyone except Helena, because between figures for timber and coal he had written fragments meant for her. "Do not bow to small souls. Learn numbers. Men lie less easily when you count better than they do. Keep copies, keep copies, keep copies." She touched the ledger and then pulled from beneath it a folded wool shawl, darned at 2 corners, and a narrow purse containing 3 shillings, 1 bent sixpence, and a brass key, with no lock now living to receive it. The key had once opened the escritoire in his study. Lady Renshaw had changed the lock within a week of the funeral, and told the solicitor the old papers were in disorder and should be sorted by competent male hands. Helena had stood in the hall and listened while those competent hands carried crates into a hired cart. She had heard her father's name spoken as an inconvenience. She had heard the unpaid note described as evidence of imprudence. She had not heard anyone mention the sealed packet addressed in his own script to Miss Helena Kowalski, to be opened on her 21st birthday in the presence of counsel. She had asked for it once, then twice, then again on the morning she turned 21. Lady Renshaw had smiled with her lips alone and said there was no packet, only debts. That same day, Helena's allowance appeared in the household book as a liability against board, coal, and laundering, calculated to the penny, increased each quarter, signed in a flourish not her own. The sum climbed like ivy up a wall. Every ribbon she was refused had been entered as expense spared for her benefit. Every pair of shoes, re-heeled rather than replaced, had become proof she consumed too much. At first she argued, then she requested to see vouchers. Then she copied columns by candlelight, when no one watched, and found the same debt listed twice under different headings. The same tailor paid twice for Clara's bodices, and charged once to Helena's account. Lady Renshaw caught her with the ledger open, and slapped her hard enough that the room tilted. "You will not pry into matters above you," she had said. "Girls without dowry do not audit households." The sting had faded. The sentence had not. Helena wrapped the shawl around her shoulders now, pinned it with a bent clasp, and tucked the purse into her sleeve. In the cracked mirror she saw that rain had loosened strands of hair around her temples and made her look younger until the eyes ruined the effect. She extinguished the candle with wetted fingers and stood in darkness a moment longer than needed, because this was the one room in the house where silence did not demand obedience. When she descended again, the servants' staircase carried smells from every floor, roast and wine from the abandoned supper-room, beeswax and perfume from the withdrawing chamber, damp ash from the scullery where morning would begin before this night ended. Halfway down she met Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, a narrow woman with iron-grey hair and hands broadened by years of wringing linen. Mrs. Davies held a basket of napkins against her hip and stopped when she saw Helena, dressed for the ball in black wool and old shoes. Her eyes moved once over the hem, the shawl, the bare ears where pearls should have hung. "Miss Helena," she said softly, because when the hall was empty she still used the title no one else permitted. "You have no carriage." Helena adjusted the pin at her shoulder to keep her fingers from shaking. "I have feet." The housekeeper's mouth thinned, not disapproval, but fear, worn into shape by service. She lowered her voice further. Her ladyship gave orders. "If you are seen in the rooms, there will be trouble." Helena thought of trouble as a weather that had never stopped. She thought of years measured in commands obeyed and dignity itemized as debt. "There is trouble whether I am seen or not," she said. Mrs. Davies looked at her for a long beat, then shifted the basket to one arm and drew from her apron pocket a pair of plain kid gloves, mended at the thumbs, too large by half. "Take them. Return them tomorrow if they survive." Helena hesitated because gifts in this house often carried hidden prices, but Mrs. Davies's face held only fatigue and a kind of stubborn respect. She accepted the gloves and pulled them on. The lining scratched her split knuckles, then warmed. "Thank you." Mrs. Davies gave a brief nod toward the lower hall, where the back door stood bolted. "If Parker asks, I did not see you pass." This, too, was a risk measured and chosen. Helena knew the scale of it. Housekeepers lost places for less. She set the empty basket from Mrs. Davies's hand onto the nearest table, an old reflex of aid, and for one instant their wrists touched, skin to skin, proof that gentleness could survive in narrow spaces. Then voices rose from the front of the house as 2 late guests arrived to collect opera cloaks left behind, and the spell of privacy broke. Helena continued down, crossed the scullery where banked coals gave off a red, exhausted glow, and lifted the rear bolt herself. Rain met her face at once, cold and thin, needling through fog. She stepped into the mews, closed the door without sound, and stood with her back against the stone while her eyes adjusted to gaslight and mist. Bond Street lay a short walk east, slick with runoff and horse-dung ground into black ribbons by wheels. The fog carried every noise farther than sight could follow, harness chains clinking, laughter from open carriage windows, the call of a link boy offering his torch, a drunk song already broken by weather. Helena kept to the edge where shop awnings spilled less water and began to walk. Her skirt grew heavier with each block. Mud climbed the hem she had mended by hand that very afternoon. Twice gentlemen in evening black passed without seeing her. Then one turned, glanced at her face, and looked away with the quick caution of a man who recognized distress and chose not to engage it. At the corner near the print cellar she paused beneath a guttering lamp and pressed her gloved hand against her stomach until the cramp eased. Hunger and anger shared a pulse now. She could not separate them. Across the street, in the bright window of a jeweller, silver branches held necklaces like frozen spray. In the darker pane beside them, she caught her own reflection again, narrow and severe in morning black, moving through London as if the city had misfiled her among its shadows. Plain, burden, dependent, debtor. The labels had followed her through 4 seasons and 3 household ledgers, spoken by Lady Renshaw in drawing rooms, repeated by Clara as entertainment, sharpened by Eliza into little performances for guests. Yet none of those words altered the facts her father had taught her to trust. A name could be stolen in company and still remain true in law. A debt could be written in ink and still be false in sum. A woman told she belonged nowhere could still place one foot before another and arrive where she had been forbidden. By the 2nd week of November she had learned that endurance alone did not redeem injustice, but it did carry a person to the door where justice might yet be forced to look at her. Ravenscourt House stood 4 streets ahead, all lit windows and music and polished stone. Helena lifted her chin against the rain, fixed her eyes on that distant brightness, and walked toward it without slowing. Ravenscourt House rose out of the rain like a lit ship, all white stone and iron balconies, and windows burning gold against the fog. And by the time Helena reached the rear mews, her breath tore at her throat and her skirt dragged 1/2 pound of London mud at the hem. 2 coach lanterns threw long bars of light across the cobbles. Stable boys ran between wheels. Footmen shouted for room. Somewhere beyond the service wall, strings and horns from the ballroom moved in bright, ordered figures that had no place for her. She passed a stack of hampers slick with rain and went to the servants' side entrance, where heat leaked under the door in a thin, blessed line. A porter in Ashbourne livery stood beneath the lamp with a ledger in one hand and a quill behind his ear. He looked at her once, then down at her shoes, then back to her face with practised indifference hardening into contempt. "Tradesmen use the alley gate," he said. "Servants by summons only. Move along." Helena kept her voice level, though her jaw shook with cold. "I am neither. My name is Helena Kowalski. I was invited." He gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. "In that dress." Behind him the corridor doors swung open and shut as men carried crates of wine toward the lower pantry. Steam rolled out with them, rich with roast meat and clove and wax. The smell struck her empty stomach so sharply she had to brace her palm against the wet stone jamb. "Ask inside," she said. "Lady Renshaw came an hour ago with her daughters. Miss Clara Renshaw is wearing ivory satin with seed pearls at the bodice. It was sewn in this city by Hargreaves on Brook Street 2 years past. The gown belongs to me." The porter shifted his weight, impatient now. "You have no card, no chaperone, no cloak fit for a maid. I have my orders." A second servant emerged carrying silver salvers and halted when he saw her. His eyes flicked over her black frock and lingered on the split skin above her glove, where rain had darkened the wool. "Best go home, miss," he muttered. "The watch will turn rough if called." Helena straightened. "Then call the watch and write my name in your ledger before you do it." The porter's mouth hardened. He reached for the bell pull fixed inside the frame. "Last warning. Leave!" The words had scarcely landed when a heavy thud came from the passage beyond, followed by a sharp curse and the crash of something metal striking flagstone. The porter half turned. In that instant Helena moved, not to run, but to hold her place in the doorway as the inner door was shoved wide from within, and a tall man came through too quickly, dark coat unbuttoned, cravat loosened at the throat as if the rooms behind him had grown unbreathable. She hit solid wool and muscle and staggered backward on the slick step. A gloved hand caught her upper arm before she went down. The grip was iron. The voice was colder. "Stop!" The single word cut through the yard noise and held everyone still, even the stable boys at the far wall. Helena lifted her eyes to the face above her and knew him before thought arranged the features into a name. Lord Lucian Vale, Duke of Ashbourne. The scar at the right brow, pale against dark hair. The severe mouth London called merciless. The eyes, a grey so hard and clear they looked like winter water over stone. He released her arm at once, but not before his gaze dropped and returned with unnerving precision. The soaked black wool clinging to her legs, the worn cuffs mended by uneven stitches, the reddened knuckles under oversized gloves, the bruise shadowed beneath her left sleeve where Clara's bracelet had struck bone the previous day. He looked as if he counted facts for a living and trusted only what he could verify. The porter bent nearly double. "Your Grace, my apologies." She forced the door. The Duke did not glance at him. He addressed Helena as if the others were furniture. "You are shivering." She had meant to answer with composure. Her teeth clicked once before she mastered them. "I am wet." He looked at the porter then, and the man's face drained. "Why is she standing in the rain?" "No credentials, Your Grace. She claims an invitation." "Claims," Helena repeated, and shame burned hot enough to rival the cold. "I had one." The Duke's expression did not alter. "Had?" She felt the power in the yard tilt, not towards safety yet, but away from immediate dismissal. It was enough to keep speaking. "Lady Renshaw removed it from the dressing table before the carriages left. She sent me after the house had gone. I came on foot." The porter started to interject. The Duke lifted one hand, a small movement, and silence dropped again. "You are not permitted here," he said to Helena, each word flat with rank and habit. She met his gaze because retreat had already cost too much. "Neither is theft, Your Grace." A flicker, nearly invisible, passed through his eyes. "Who stole from you?" Her throat tightened. She did not look at the watching servants. "Lady Renshaw took my gown, my invitation, and my name in every room that matters." Rain struck the cobbles harder for several seconds, then eased. The Duke watched her face as if testing for fracture lines. "Your name?" "Miss Helena Kowalski." "Kowalski!" he repeated, and she could not tell whether he recognized it from old ledgers, old dinners, old gossip around a dead man's debt. daughter of Jan Kowalski, shipping partner to Armitage before he fell ill. Yes, the Duke's jaw tightened once. Jan Kowalski is dead. 3 years and 2 months. The porter shifted again, desperate. Your Grace, the assembly waits. Lady Clara requested the first... Be silent, the Duke said, still looking at Helena. It was not loud, it required no volume. From the ballroom corridor behind him came a wash of heat and violin, then the quick patter of smaller feet, and a nursemaid's hushed call for Master Edward to slow down on polished floors. The sound struck him. Helena saw it happen. His shoulders went rigid in a way that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a wound she could not see. He moved 1 step aside from the doorway and made space for her inside the stone threshold, out of direct rain, but not into comfort. "Stand there," he said. It was a command and shelter in the same breath. She stepped where indicated. Water pooled beneath her hem on the flagstones. A footman rushed forward with a cloth to wipe it, then retreated at a glance from the Duke. "How old are you, Miss Kowalski?" 22. "Where is your family escort?" She gave him the truth because lies failed fastest under eyes like his. "My stepmother ordered that I remain home. She did not expect me to disobey." "Lady Renshaw is your stepmother. By her marriage to my father, not by any duty she has shown me since." He turned finally toward the porter. "Did you send for the watch?" "I was about to, Your Grace." "You will not." The porter swallowed. "Yes, Your Grace." A bell rang somewhere in the house, 3 clear strikes for the next dance. Helena's fingers had gone numb in the borrowed gloves. She pressed them together to keep sensation. The Duke noticed. He noticed everything. "You have injured hands. Work does that. Work does not place bruises under sleeves." The line landed like a blade laid on a table between them. She could not answer without exposing rooms she still had to walk back into if this failed. She held his gaze and said nothing. He inclined his head once, as if filing the silence with the rest. "Very well, you may either return home now and avoid public spectacle, or you may enter this house under my protection and let the matter be examined where witnesses cannot pretend blindness." The choice was no choice. If she went back unseen, Lady Renshaw would write the story by breakfast and ink it into every ledger that mattered. If she entered, she could be destroyed more quickly, but in full light. She heard her father's voice from years ago, low over account books. Keep copies, keep names. Force the sum to be spoken aloud. Helena lifted her chin. "I did not walk through rain to remain unseen." By 9:30 the corridors were thick with late arrivals, and when the Duke offered his arm there on the service threshold, every servant in view stared as if a wall had moved. He did not soften the gesture with explanation. He merely held his sleeve at the angle required for formal escort, waiting. She hesitated 1 heartbeat, then placed her gloved fingers at his cuff. Heat from him travelled through wet wool and up her arm with frightening immediacy. He turned to the porter without looking back. "Record this entry. Miss Helena Kowalski arrives by my direction." The porter fumbled for his pen. "Yes, Your Grace." "Write it clearly." "Yes, Your Grace." They moved. Through the lower passage first, where kitchen maids flattened themselves against stone and stared at Helena's black dress with open alarm. Up the narrow back stair where candlelight guttered in draughts and gilded the edge of the Duke's profile in harsh planes. Across a landing lined with ancestral portraits that watched from varnished dark, while musicians tuned beyond double doors. At the top, a pair of guards in ceremonial blue stepped forward automatically, then froze when they saw whom he escorted. One guard began, "Your Grace, instructions were given that—" "By whom?" "Lady Renshaw, sir, for household convenience." The Duke's mouth thinned. Lady Renshaw does not issue instructions at Ravenscourt House." He did not break stride. The guards opened the doors. Sound struck first. Violins, conversation, laughter edged with malice, the soft thunder of 200 people pretending not to observe one another while observing everything. Light struck second, chandeliers blazing across mirrored walls and polished floor, until each jewel in the room threw back fire. Helena felt the collective turn of heads as a physical force. Black wool among silk and satin became a declaration no one had consented to hear. At the centre of the nearest set, Clara moved in Helena's ivory gown, seed pearls flashing at throat and cuff as she turned beneath the candles. For one suspended second, Clara smiled, radiant and secure. Then she saw the Duke. Then she saw Helena at his arm. The smile broke. Lady Renshaw stood near the card tables in rose-coloured silk, fan lifted, speaking to a circle of matrons. She followed Clara's line of sight and went very still. Even at this distance, Helena could smell rosewater when the woman approached, the familiar scent of calculated cruelty. Guests parted to let her through. She bowed to the Duke with exquisite control, then looked at Helena as one might look at soot on marble. "Your Grace," she said, "how kind of you to rescue a confused girl from the rain. Helena has spells of dramatics. She mistakes household generosity for injury." The Duke did not release Helena's arm. "I know a lie when I hear one." A hush moved outward from them in rings. Lady Renshaw's fan stilled. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me." His voice stayed quiet. "Miss Kowalski entered at my direction. She remains." Helena felt her pulse in her throat, hard and unsteady. But when Lady Renshaw turned that polished contempt upon her, she did not lower her eyes. "You are making a scene," her stepmother whispered, smile fixed for the room. "Go upstairs now, and I may yet forgive this." Helena answered in the same low register. "You wore forgiveness thin years ago." Lady Renshaw's eyes flashed. "Ungrateful child!" "I am not a child." Clara had reached them by then, face flushed from dance and fear, one hand clutching the ivory skirt as if to hide the theft by holding it closer. Eliza hovered behind her, suddenly silent. Around them the music resumed by force of habit, but no one nearby danced. The Duke looked from Clara's gown to Helena's black cuffs, then back to Lady Renshaw. "Is that dress contested property?" he asked. Lady Renshaw recovered enough to laugh softly. "Surely your Grace does not intend to arbitrate seamstresses' quarrels in the middle of a ball." "Answer!" The single word dropped like stone. Lady Renshaw opened her fan again with a snap of painted sticks. "The gown was in my household. My daughter wears it. That is the entire matter." Helena felt the urge to speak, to pour every ledger entry and missing key and sealed packet into the blazing room until the chandeliers shook with it. She forced herself to precision instead. "My father commissioned that satin for me before his death. The bill was paid in full by him. Mrs. Hargreaves can attest it." The Duke's gaze did not leave Lady Renshaw. "Can she?" It was not a question. It was a note entered into an account no one else could see. A young footman hurried toward them then, pale, breathless, stopping 3 steps short as protocol demanded. He bowed too quickly and nearly lost balance. "Your Grace, forgive me, Master Edward is missing from the nursery passage. Nurse says he slipped away toward the gallery doors." The Duke went motionless. In that stillness, Helena felt the room tilt toward another kind of danger, one that had nothing to do with gowns or rank and everything to do with a child loose in a crowd and candles burning too near silk. Lucian Vale's fingers tightened once around her hand where it rested at his sleeve. When he spoke, the command was stripped to bone. "Show me!" The footman spun and ran, and the Duke moved after him, with Helena still at his sleeve, cutting through dancers who broke apart at the sight of his face. Music faltered, recovered, then thinned behind them as they passed under an arch of mirrors into the East Gallery. The air changed there, less perfume, more wax and wet wool from cloaks piled on chairs. Lamps burned lower along the panelled wall, their light broken by portraits and gilt frames. Ahead, voices overlapped in frightened fragments. A nursemaid called Master Edward's name in a whisper too tight for sense. A butler spoke over her, insisting everyone stand back. A child made no sound at all. They reached the gallery bend and saw the knot of servants near the conservatory doors. A tall candelabrum had tipped onto its side beside the threshold, candles snuffed, one arm bent. A crystal épergne lay shattered across the parquet, clear pieces spread like ice. Two maids stood with brooms and did not move. No one wanted to be first to touch anything in the Duke's house when his son was missing in plain view. "Where?" Lucien said. The butler pointed with a trembling hand toward a long table draped in green damask at the far wall. Beneath it, half hidden by hanging cloth, small boots pressed against the skirting board. A narrow shoulder shook once, then stillness again. The nursemaid took one step forward. "Master Edward, please come out. Your father is here." The cloth shifted farther inward, as if the child had tried to disappear into wood. Lucien's jaw set. He started toward the table. Helena saw what he did not, because she was already looking lower, where fear lived in bodies instead of faces. The child's right hand lay outside the cloth in a rigid claw, palm up, bright with a thin run of red where a sliver of crystal had bitten across the heel of it. Not a grave wound, but enough for panic to fasten its teeth. She moved before rank could forbid her. "Do not crowd him!" The Duke turned sharply. She did not ask permission. She crossed the broken floor in careful steps, lifted her skirt clear of the shards, and knelt a yard from the hanging cloth so her head was lower than the child's. Her knees hit hard timber. Pain shot up her thighs. She stayed there. "Edward," she said softly, as if he had invited her, "I am Helena. I will not drag you out." No answer came. His breathing reached her in quick, shallow pulls. She laid her gloved hands palm down on the floorboards where he could see them. "Look at my fingers. I am not touching you yet." A small face appeared between folds of cloth. He was perhaps 6, fair-haired, cheeks white with shock, grey eyes blown wide. He looked at her black dress first, then at her hands, then at the blood on his own palm, and flinched so hard his head struck the underside of the table. Helena kept her voice level. "You are safe. The candles are out. No one will step on you." From behind her, Lucien said, "Edward, come here now." The command hit the boy like another loud noise. He pressed deeper under the table and shook his head in jerks. Helena glanced back once. "Your Grace, please." The words carried both deference and refusal. She returned to the child before anyone could answer. "Edward, breathe with me." She drew one slow breath, exaggerating the movement so he could count it. "In, hold, out." He stared, did not follow. She tried again. "In for 4, out for 4. We shall make the numbers march." Her father had taught her that trick over ledgers when her hands shook from sums that would not balance. Give fear arithmetic and it stops inventing catastrophes. The child copied one breath ragged and too fast, then another, better. Behind her, voices dropped to murmurs. Boots shifted and stilled. Helena lifted her chin toward the nearest maid without turning her body. "Bring me a clean linen napkin. Not lace. Plain linen and a basin of cool water." The maid looked to the butler. The butler looked to the Duke. Lucien spoke without taking his eyes from Helena. "And do it." Feet scattered at once. Helena eased one hand forward, inch by inch, until her fingers hovered near Edward's wrist. "May I hold this hand?" He gave the smallest nod. She closed her fingers around his forearm above the cut, firm enough to steady, gentle enough not to trap. The skin was cold and slick. The slice itself was shallow, but crystal dust clung to it and stung with every flex. "You did not make a fuss in the ballroom," she said quietly. "You came out to breathe. That was wise." His mouth trembled. "It was loud." "I know. I dropped Grandmamma's glass tree. That tree should not have been left near running feet." He stared at her, as if no one had ever answered him that way. Children were blamed for gravity by adults who preferred objects to confession. She knew the pattern. She had lived beneath it for years. The maid returned with a folded napkin and basin. Water sloshed over the rim. Helena dipped one corner, wrung it, and held it where Edward could see. "This will sting once, then less. I will count." He nodded again, eyes squeezed shut. She cleaned the cut in one precise motion, removed a tiny shard with her thumbnail, and pressed the linen. Edward hissed and tried to pull away. She tightened her grip above the wound and began, low and steady. A Polish cradle hymn her father had hummed when fever took Helena at 9, and the doctor said she must stay awake through the night. The words were old country words, soft on the tongue, shaped for breathing more than meaning. Edward's shoulders lowered by a fraction at the second line. By the third, his breathing matched the rhythm. At the gallery entrance, Lucien had gone very still. He stood just inside the arch, one hand braced on the carved jamb, as if stepping closer required force he had not prepared to spend. Candlelight sharpened the scar over his brow. His face gave away nothing except a tension absolute and unblinking. Helena folded the napkin into a narrow band and tested pressure. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. She needed a tie. Without hesitation, she gripped the lower edge of her black skirt and tore a strip from the inside hem. The rip sounded loud in the quiet gallery. She ignored the gasp from somewhere behind her, wrapped the cloth over linen and knotted it flat against the child's wrist. "Hold your hand high," she said, "like a captain with a signal flag." Edward raised it obediently, uncertain and proud at once. When the quarter bell struck for 10, its 4 notes moved through the house like distant iron, and no one in the gallery moved until the final tone died. The nursemaid took a cautious step. "Master Edward, shall I carry you upstairs?" Edward looked at Helena and clutched the front of her sleeve with his uninjured hand. "No!" The word was small but absolute. Helena felt the tug and the eyes of every servant and guest now gathering at the corridor mouth. She did not pull away. "You may walk," she told him, "slowly. If your knees feel weak, you may hold my hand." He crawled from under the table, straightened with difficulty, and stood close against her shoulder. Blood had dried in a thin line along his palm and down one finger. His lower lip shook. He did not cry. Lucien crossed the remaining distance then, each step measured. He crouched before his son, broad frame making shelter of his body without touching him. "Edward," the boy's gaze flicked to his father and away. "I broke it. Yes, I am sorry." A beat passed. Lucien's voice came rougher than before. "You are hurt." "It is little," Edward whispered, repeating Helena's tone as if borrowing strength from it. Lucien looked to the bandage, then to Helena's torn hem, then to the split skin at her own knuckles, where fresh blood had seeped through the borrowed glove while she worked. He took all of it in, stored it. "The house surgeon," he said, over his shoulder. A servant answered at once. "Sent for, Your Grace. He is crossing from Berkeley Street." "Clear this corridor." Lucian rose and turned, his expression freezing the nearest cluster of curious guests in place. Now! Silk rustled. Men in black coats retreated. The butler bowed and began directing people back toward the card rooms with brittle courtesy. The maids knelt to gather crystal under supervision, hands shaking. Only then did Lady Renshaw appear at the arch, Clara and Eliza behind her, both pale under powder. Rosewater reached Helena before words did. Lady Renshaw pressed a hand to her breast in practised alarm. "What a dreadful disturbance! Your Grace, I warned you the girl is prone to theatrics. She inserts herself anywhere attention turns." Edward flinched at the voice. His grip tightened on Helena's sleeve. Lucian did not look at Lady Renshaw. His gaze stayed on his son. "Not now." Lady Renshaw smiled as if she had not heard the warning. "Surely this scene need not involve household accusations in front of your guests. Helena has always sought to elevate her position by pity. I fear she has used the child's fright to—" "Enough," Helena said, before caution could choke the word. Silence cracked across the corridor. She rose to her feet slowly so Edward did not lose balance, placing herself between him and Lady Renshaw without flourish. Her knees trembled from kneeling on wood. Her torn skirt brushed damp floor. She kept her voice even. "He was frightened and cut. That is all that happened. If you wish to accuse me, do so when he is not required to hear it." Lady Renshaw's eyes flashed with naked hatred for one instant before the mask returned. "You forget yourself." "I remember exactly where I am." Clara made a strangled sound and looked away from the bandage on Edward's hand. Eliza studied the ceiling as though searching for rescue. Lucienne turned then, at last, and faced Lady Renshaw with a stillness more severe than anger. "You will step back." "My lord, I am trying to preserve order." "You are impairing it." The words were clipped, final. He shifted one half step so his shoulder aligned with Helena's, and his son stood behind them both, small and breathing hard but upright. It was not a tender gesture. It was positional, tactical, public. A physician arrived in black coat and wet hat, carrying a leather case. He bowed rapidly. "Your Grace," Lucien inclined his head toward Edward. "Examine him." The physician knelt, asked permission of the child before touching the bandage, and unwound Helena's knot with careful fingers. "Who dressed this?" "I did," Helena said. "Cleanly done," he murmured. "No deep cut, no tendon harm. He requires washing, salve, and rest." He looked up at Lucian. "He is fortunate." Edward reached again for Helena as the physician prepared fresh dressing. This time he found her hand and held it through the procedure, eyes fixed on her sleeve rather than the wound. She resumed the low Polish tune under her breath. The physician's hands steadied with the rhythm. Even the nursemaid's shoulders eased. When the new bandage was tied, Edward leaned against Helena's side, exhausted by fear more than pain. Lucien watched his son for a long moment, then spoke to the nursemaid. "Take him to the blue nursery. No guests. No noise." Edward shook his head at once. "Helena comes!" The nursemaid froze. Lady Renshaw opened her mouth, scandal gathering like storm. Lucien answered first. "If Miss Kowalski agrees." The choice landed in Helena's hands, plain and visible, while 50 feet of polished corridor listened. She looked down at Edward's pale face, at the deliberate way he stood without tears, and at the small fingers wrapped around hers, as if she were a railing on a steep stair. "I will walk with him," she said. Lucien gave one short nod. "Go." She turned with Edward and the nursemaid toward the nursery stair. At the landing she glanced back once. The Duke remained where she had left him, broad shoulders square beneath chandelier light, eyes fixed on her with that same unnerving exactness, as if the account between them had shifted columns, and neither of them yet knew the new total. By the time she reached the blue nursery door, Edward's steps had grown uneven with fatigue. She settled him on a settee near the hearth, accepted warm water from the nursemaid, and cleaned the last trace of blood from his fingers while he watched her face in solemn silence. She told him the words of the Polish song meant sleep will come, sleep will keep, and he repeated them badly but with grave concentration until his lashes lowered and his breathing deepened against the cushion. Only when the nursemaid tucked a blanket over him and whispered thanks that broke at the edges did Helena realise her own hands were shaking. She stood, wiped them on her torn skirt, and moved back toward the corridor before anyone could call the moment kindness and try to charge her for it later. At the threshold she found Lucienne already waiting in the half-light beyond the nursery lamp-glow. Alone, one hand braced against the wall, as if he had not trusted himself to sit. His gaze went first to her face, then to her bleeding knuckles, then to the ragged strip missing from her hem. "Do not leave this house tonight," he said. Helena's breath caught on the edge of refusal. The corridor lamp threw half his face into shadow and left the scar above his brow pale as old bone. He did not move from the wall. He did not soften the line. "Do not leave this house tonight," he said again. She held the doorframe with one hand to steady herself. The nursemaid behind her adjusted Edward's blanket and lowered the nursery lamp wick. Warmth from the room touched Helena's back. Cold from the corridor touched her face. Between them she stood as if on a threshold she had not chosen. "Your Grace," she said, keeping her voice low for the sleeping child, "if I remain, Lady Renshaw will call it another spectacle." "She may call it what she pleases. She governs my lodging." His gaze dropped to her torn hem, then to the blood that had seeped through one finger of the borrowed glove. When he looked up, the restraint in his expression had gone harder, not gentler. "Not tonight." The words landed with the force of an order issued on a field, not in a corridor outside a nursery. Helena felt the instinct to step back and found she could not. Her spine was against the frame already. "The house is full of witnesses," she said. "They have seen enough to ruin me." His mouth tightened once. "You arrived ruined in their eyes. You will not leave ruined, in fact." The candlestick on the side table hissed softly as wax ran down. From lower floors came a muffled swell of strings beginning another set, bright and unreal at this distance. The 10:15 had not yet struck, and yet the night felt stretched beyond ordinary measure. Helena lifted her chin. "You speak as if my life can be rearranged by command. I speak as if danger is plain." He took one step forward, then stopped, as though he had reached a line he would not cross without necessity. "Your hands are split open. Your sleeve hides a fresh bruise. You came on foot, through rain without escort. A woman who is safe does none of those things." Heat rose behind her eyes, sudden and unwelcome. She crushed it down before it could become tears. "Many women do those things. No one asks why. I asked." The simplicity of it struck deeper than comfort would have. She looked away, first, toward the nursery where Edward slept with one small hand outside the blanket, white bandage clean against his skin. Lucienne followed her glance. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "He will wake frightened in an hour. He will ask for the person who steadied him. If you are gone, he will believe he has been punished for needing help." Helena swallowed. "That is not my decision to make." "It is mine." He paused. "And tonight I make it." A board creaked at the far bend of the corridor. A footman appeared carrying a salver with folded linen, a glass bottle of distilled spirits, and a shallow bowl of warm water that sent up thin steam. He bowed, eyes fixed at a respectful point over Helena's shoulder. "From the surgeon, your grace, for the lady's hands." Helena stared at the salver. She had not heard any order given. Lucien took it from the footman himself. "Set a chair in the morning room. Keep this passage clear." "Yes, your grace." The footman vanished as quickly as he had come. Helena looked back at the Duke. "You sent for this." "I told the surgeon to leave enough for 2 patients." "And if I refused?" "Then I would place the tray at your feet and stand here until you yielded from pain or pride." There was no mockery in it, no threat for sport, only certainty. He inclined his head toward the adjoining room across the corridor, a narrow morning parlour used by governesses and children on wet days. The door stood ajar. Firelight moved faintly inside. "Sit," he said. She should have objected. She should have insisted upon distance, propriety, the dozen brittle protections women recited when they had nothing else. Instead, she crossed the corridor because her fingers had begun to throb in rhythm with her pulse, and because his stillness had become more unnerving than pursuit. The room was small, papered in faded green, with 2 straight-backed chairs, a work table, and shelves of juvenile atlases. The hearth held a modest coal fire. Its warmth reached only to the knees. Helena remained standing near the table, as Lucien set down the salver and turned one chair toward the light. "Sit," he repeated. This time she obeyed. He removed the borrowed glove from her right hand before she could protest, not rough, not delicate, simply efficient. The lining clung to torn skin. She inhaled sharply through her teeth when it came free. His eyes lifted once to her face. "Do not conceal pain. It wastes time." "You are accustomed to being obeyed." "Yes." She gave a breath that might have been a laugh in another life. "At least you are honest." He poured a small measure of spirits over clean linen. "Hold still." The first touch burned like flame laid under the skin. Helena's shoulders locked. She gripped the chair seat with her left hand and stared at the atlas spine opposite her, letters blurring for a moment before sharpening again. "I have had worse," she said. "I know." She looked at him then. He did not meet her eyes. His attention remained fixed on her knuckles as he cleaned each split with exact pressure, as if mapping damage he intended to remember. "You know," she repeated. "I saw your hands at the side door before you spoke your name." He turned her wrist gently to inspect the heel of her palm. "I saw them again while you tied my son's bandage. You were bleeding through the glove and did not pause." The admission left no room for pretense. He had watched closely, not as amusement, as record. He rinsed cloth, replaced it, wrapped a narrow strip of linen around 2 fingers, and knotted it flat. His hands were steady. The scar at his brow whitened when his jaw tightened, then eased. She heard herself ask, "Why did you come out to the service passage?" He set down the linen. "The ballroom air was close." "That is not all." "No." She waited. He did not fill the silence. The fire settled with a soft crack. At last he said, "Crowds unsettle, Edward. I check the outer corridors during assemblies." "For him." The answer should have ended there. Instead, he added, as if the words had escaped before he could call them back, "And because this house has too many doors." He reached for her left glove. She let him remove it. The cut across her knuckle had reopened when she tore her hem. Blood had dried in a thin, dark crescent. He cleaned it without comment. When she flinched, his free hand closed once around the edge of the table, hard enough that the wood creaked, then released. "Did Lady Renshaw strike you tonight?" he asked. The question came flat. Judicial. Helena looked at the fire. "No. Earlier." She held still. "This household does not speak of such things." "This household will tonight." She met his gaze. "If I accuse her without proof, I am called hysterical. If I remain silent, I am called dutiful. Neither name feeds me." Something changed in his face then. Not softness. Recognition, perhaps, and anger turned outward at last. "Do not defend her in this room," he said. "Not to spare me discomfort. Not to preserve your habit of endurance. Endurance is sometimes the only coin left." His eyes did not leave hers. "Keep it for what is worthy." A knock sounded at the door. Lucienne rose at once and opened it a hand's width. The butler stood beyond, rigid with formality. "Your Grace, Lady Renshaw requests that Miss Kowalski be returned to her carriage immediately. She states the child's incident is concluded and there is no further reason for... Tell Lady Renshaw this." Lucian's voice remained quiet. "Miss Kowalski remains at Ravenscourt House under my protection for the night. She is not to approach the nursery wing. She is not to address Miss Kowalski again this evening." The butler hesitated half a heartbeat, then bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." "And Mr. Bellamy," Lucian added, "if Lady Renshaw finds those instructions unclear, you will repeat them." "Yes, Your Grace." The door closed. Helena sat very straight in the chair, bandaged hands in her lap, pulse loud in her ears. Public humiliation could be survived. Public protection was more dangerous. It changed the terms of every room that followed. "You should not do this lightly," she said. He turned back toward her. "I do nothing lightly. She will claim I manipulated you through Edward." She already did. And the Tun will believe what keeps its order intact. Some will. He picked up the final strip of linen and bound the base of her thumb where skin had cracked from lye. "I do not require their permission." She watched him tie the knot. His fingers paused at her pulse point, just long enough for her to feel that he had noticed how fast it beat. "Why?" she asked, and the word came quieter than she intended. "Are you willing to spend your name on this?" He drew back a fraction. For the first time that night, uncertainty crossed his face, brief as lightning behind cloud. When he answered, the words were measured, each one selected under strain. "Because I saw my son choose your hand when he could have chosen mine." Silence held them. His voice dropped further. "Because you entered a room built to shame you and did not bow. Because you speak in facts when others trade in performance. Because men with ledgers have used that against you for too long." Her throat tightened. She could not decide which line had struck hardest. Not praise, not pity, recognition that did not ask her to become smaller in exchange. He stepped back, putting formal distance between them again, as if aware he had already said too much. "At dawn," he said, "you will breakfast in the small salon. Mrs. Whitcomb will attend you. Then you will come to my study. There are papers concerning your father's estate that require your presence before witnesses." She stared at him. "Papers?" "Yes. I was told there were none. You were told what served someone." The room seemed to narrow, then sharpen. Her father's locked escritoire, the missing packet, the debt columns that never balanced. All of it rose at once, not as memory, but as imminent fact. She forced her voice steady. "If this is another arrangement made over my head, I will not sign it." A flicker touched his mouth. Not quite a smile. Gone before she could trust it. "Good," he said. "Do not sign anything you have not read." The line was so close to her father's old instruction that she felt the floor tilt beneath her for an instant. She rose too quickly, caught herself on the chair back, and straightened. "I have no clothes fit for your guest chambers." "You have what you wore when you saved my son. It is sufficient. People will talk. They already are." She looked toward the nursery door across the corridor, then back at him. "If Edward wakes and asks for me, send for me. If he sleeps, I should prefer to remain unseen." Lucian held her gaze. "You are no longer invisible in this house, Miss Kowalski." The words could not be recalled once spoken. They stood between them like a seal set in hot wax. He opened the door and offered neither arm nor ceremony this time, only passage. She stepped into the corridor beside him. At the far end waited Mrs. Whitcomb, the senior housekeeper of Ravenscourt, broad-shouldered and grave, carrying a folded wool shawl and a key on a black ribbon. She curtsied to Helena with full respect, not the clipped nod given to a dependent. "Your room is prepared, miss," Mrs. Whitcomb said. Lucian addressed the housekeeper without looking away from Helena. "The blue chamber, next to the nursery. Fire banked. A tray sent. No visitors admitted without my word." "It is done, your grace." Helena wrapped the shawl around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. She drew one slow breath, then another, and inclined her head. "I will remain tonight," she said. Lucian gave a single nod, as if the matter had now entered the realm of settled fact. "Rest while you can." Mrs. Whitcomb guided Helena down the corridor at a measured pace. At the turning, Helena looked back once. He had not moved. He stood where she left him, one hand on the carved nursery lintel, keeping watch in absolute stillness until she passed from sight. Mrs. Whitcomb led her into the blue chamber and shut the door with a soft, decisive click that sounded nothing like exile. Fire glowed behind a brass screen. Dry slippers stood by the hearth. On the dressing table lay a folded night rail, a comb, and a covered tray that sent up the clean smell of broth. Helena set her borrowed shawl over the chair back with care, as if rough hands might still snatch it away, and only then realized how violently her body had begun to shake now that no one required composure from it. Mrs. Whitcomb poured warm water into a basin. "The surgeon left salve for the hands. I will apply it if you permit." Helena nodded. The housekeeper unwound the linen Lucian had tied, inspected each split knuckle without comment, and spread salve with a touch practised enough to hurt less than kindness usually did. "Mrs. Davies at Lady Renshaw's sent a parcel by evening messenger," she said quietly. "It arrived shortly before you came up, under seal. His Grace ordered it kept untouched for you." A pulse of gratitude and fear moved together through Helena's chest. "Mrs. Davies sent it." "She did? What was in it?" "Your 3 books, a purse with coins, a brass key, a folded card addressed to you." Mrs. Whitcomb met her eyes in the mirror. "And a note saying she had kept her silence long enough." Helena closed her fingers around the edge of the washstand until sensation steadied. Every small thing she had hidden in the attic had survived the night. When the housekeeper left, Helena drank the broth in slow sips, then sat on the side of the bed, still dressed, unable to trust sleep. Somewhere after midnight the nursery bell rang once. She was in the corridor before she knew she had stood. Lucian was already there, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled, his hand on Edward's door. "He woke, calling for the song," he said. She entered. Edward sat upright in bed, hair damp at the temples, eyes wide in lamplight. He held out his bandaged hand, and she took it, then sang the same Polish lines into the hush while the nursemaid tucked blankets close around him. At the second verse his breathing slowed. At the third he slept again. Helena did not notice Lucian in the doorway until she rose and turned. He had not moved through the entire song. At dawn, rain had thinned to a pale mist on the nursery panes. Mrs. Whitcomb brought Helena to the small salon, as promised. Tea steamed beside untouched rolls. On the sideboard sat the parcel from Mrs. Davies, tied in plain string and sealed with kitchen wax. Helena broke it herself. Mickiewicz. Milton, with her father's notes. The ledger with its hard-pressed ink. Her narrow purse. The bent sixpence. The brass key. Beneath them lay the invitation card Lady Renshaw had hidden, her own name still clear in the clerk's hand. Folded inside was Mrs. Davis's note in blunt script. I saw the card removed. I saw the ledger altered. I should have spoken sooner. At 8, the study doors closed behind 5 people. Lucian at the desk, Mr. Bellamy with the household register, Mr. Fiske, Ashbourne's solicitor, with a red dispatch case, a magistrate from Marlborough Street in travelling coat and wet cuffs, and Helena standing because she could not yet bear the vulnerability of sitting in judgment over her own life. Mr. Fiske set a packet wrapped in oilskin before her. The superscription was unmistakable. Miss Helena Kowalski, to be opened on her 21st birthday in presence of counsel. Her father's hand. The room narrowed to that slanting line of ink. "You will open it," Lucian said. "No one else." Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. Wax cracked. The first sheet was a codicil witnessed and notarized naming Helena sole beneficiary of the Kowalski leasehold, securities, and personal effects, with Lady Renshaw appointed temporary steward only until Helena reached majority. The second sheet was a private memorandum in her father's hand, listing sums advanced to Lady Renshaw for household expenses and explicitly forbidding those advances to be charged against Helena's maintenance. The third was a letter to counsel instructing immediate audit if any claim of daughter's debt appeared in household accounts. Helena read each line aloud. Her voice remained level until the signature at the bottom, then roughened and recovered. Mr. Fiske opened the red dispatch case and produced copied ledgers from Lady Renshaw's bank, obtained under writ before dawn. The duplicate entries were there exactly as Helena had remembered. One tailor paid twice, coal charged to Helena for months she had slept without fire, music tuition billed for Clara, and entered as Helena's refused instruction, and a withdrawal on the day of Helena's 21st birthday marked settlement of sealed family matter. No settlement had ever reached Helena. The magistrate sanded his notes and looked up. "Miss Kowalski, do you attest that these household pages came from your father's original ledger?" She placed her palm on the worn book Mrs. Davies had sent. "I attest it." "Do you attest that the invitation card was addressed to you and withheld?" "I do." Bellamy stepped forward with the Ravenscourt entry ledger. "Recorded at 9:30 by your Grace's direct order. Miss Helena Kowalski arrived without card because card had been removed at prior address," Lucienne said. "Add also that she entered under rain with visible injury." The magistrate's pen scratched. "Noted," a knock sounded. Bellamy opened the door. Lady Renshaw entered in morning silk the colour of old roses, Clara and Eliza behind her, both ungloved and pale. Lady Renshaw's smile was precise. "Your Grace, this performance has gone far enough. Helena is overwrought. I am willing to take her home and put this embarrassment to rest." "No," the magistrate said before Lucian could speak. "Madame, you are here to answer questions." For the first time, Lady Renshaw's composure thinned. "On whose authority?" "Mine." Questions followed in clipped succession. About the missing packet, about the debt columns, about the invitation card, about bruises observed by multiple witnesses. Lady Renshaw denied, deflected, then accused Helena of ingratitude with a tremor of fury she could not hide. Clara stood silent until the magistrate asked who had worn the contested gown. At that she began to cry in short, angry breaths. "I wore it," Clara said. "Mother said no one would know. She said Helena had no claim left to anything." Lady Renshaw turned on her. "Be quiet." Clara flinched, then reached behind her to the maid waiting at the threshold. The maid stepped forward with a flat box. Clara took it in both hands and set it on the desk before Helena. "It is yours," she whispered. "I had it brushed." Inside lay the ivory satin gown, seed pearls intact. One side seemed strained but repairable. Helena touched the bodice once and shut the lid. Eliza, eyes fixed on the carpet, spoke without lifting her head. "I saw the invitation hidden under Mother's fan in the dressing room." Lady Renshaw made a strangled sound. "You foolish girl!" The magistrate rose. "Lady Renshaw, by evidence presented and witness statements, I am issuing warrant for fraud, coercive misappropriation, and assault pending formal hearing." 2 guards entered at Bellamy's signal, blue coats darkened by rain. Lady Renshaw drew herself up, rustle of silk sharp as a blade. "You cannot parade me through London like a common thief." Lucien's voice was quiet enough to make the room colder. "You paraded her for years." The guards took Lady Renshaw's wrists with professional restraint and led her out. She did not look back. Clara wept openly now. Eliza followed in stunned silence. At the threshold, Clara turned once, eyes swollen, and said to Helena, "I never thought she would truly be stopped." Helena did not answer. Clara left. By noon, the rain had cleared. Sun struck the study windows and made dust bright as gilt. The magistrate departed with documents sealed. Mr. Fisk remained to draft immediate transfer papers, restoring Helena's legal control of the Kowalski lease and assets. Lucien read each clause aloud as the pen moved. No debt burden attached, full accounting ordered. Missing portrait and personal effects to be recovered from Renshaw storage under inventory. Helena's allowance arrears to be repaid from seized accounts. Mrs. Davies's testimony recorded and protected. "Add one more line," Helena said. Fisk looked up. "Miss." "Mrs. Davies keeps her position if she wishes it, at proper wage." Lucien nodded once. "Write it." When the final page was sanded, Helena signed with a hand that no longer shook. The brass key from her parcel lay beside the inkstand. Fisk examined it, then opened a narrow drawer in the desk and withdrew a small walnut dispatch box stamped J.K. "This was delivered from your father's old office to Ashbourne Archives as collateral paperwork after his death," he said. "No one could open it." Helena took the key. It fit on first turn. Inside were her mother's portrait miniature wrapped in linen, the deed abstract for the London lease, and a letter in Polish from her father, brief and fierce. "If they make you small, stand anyway." Edward burst in then, nursemaid breathless behind him, bandaged hand held high like a flag exactly as instructed. He crossed the room and attached himself to Helena's side with complete certainty. Lucien watched the gesture, then dismissed everyone but them with a glance. Bellamy closed the door. Silence settled. Not empty. Charged. Lucien stood opposite her, sunlight drawing hard planes across his face. "You have your name restored, your house restored, your accounts restored." He paused. "I ask one thing beyond that. Stand here with it beside mine." Helena looked down at Edward's fingers, looped through hers, then up at the man who had chosen evidence over convenience in a room built for convenience. "On terms spoken plainly," she said. "No guardianship over my property. My staff retained by my decision. My books remain mine. Any child in this house, yours or mine, is corrected without fear. Yes, if I say no to a room, a guest, a season, it is no. Yes. If I keep my father's name, it is kept. Yes, she held his gaze, then I will stand as myself." By 3 o'clock the special licence was in hand, procured through channels that bent only for dukes and emergencies. They were married in the chapel at Ravenscourt, with Edward drowsing against the nursemaid, Mrs. Whitcomb and Bellamy as witnesses, Mr. Fisk holding the register, and rainwater still drying on the stone steps outside. Helena wore plain black with clean cuffs and bandaged hands. The ivory gown remained folded in its box, no longer stolen, not required for proof. After the vows, Lucien did not reach for spectacle. He reached for the dispatch box and placed it in her hands before anyone else moved. "Your papers?" he said. That evening, when the last signatures were locked and the house had gone quiet, he walked her to the threshold of the restored blue chamber, now opened into adjoining rooms prepared in her name. Edward slept safely next door. Her father's miniature stood on the mantel where firelight could find it. In the corridor, Lucien halted, gave her the key on a black ribbon, and waited. Helena closed her fingers around the metal, opened the door herself, and said, "Come in."